through what we're going to be, and then
Sure.
we'll just get into it.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'm going to assume everyone here is an 80-20 endurance athlete. I also have a few of my athletes maybe jumped in there. I can't see all the participants, but yeah, this is really just a great introduction to Fuelin and sort of what they're doing basically with integrating nutrition and fueling with training peaks and training plans for endurance athletes. So just a really great chance for you guys, everyone to get to know Scott and Jonathan and Elizabeth and get a feel for the program, and also then talk about a pretty interesting topic that, sort of on most people's minds at this time of year, which is sort of that post-season nutrition. What do you do now you're not training? Talking about body composition, etc. So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for you guys to see how the program works and learn a few things. And then of course we'll always be able to help you see how you could start using the app if you wanted to start a nutrition plan that went with your 80-20 endurance training.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so very quickly, my name's Scott Tyndall. I'm Australian. I'm a co-founder of Fuelin. I've worked in a number of professional sports for a number of years, and my primary focus on Ironman has been since 2017, where I first created this program working with professional Ironman athlete Sarah Piampiano. Since that time, the program has changed and sort of been reiterated from Google Sheets to a web-based platform to now an iOS app that syncs with Training Peaks, as Layla said, to give what we term training-based nutrition in a way that no one else is doing it, so that it is completely individualized and periodized towards what the individual athlete wants based on the training that you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis.
Elizabeth Inpine, not an Aussie, if my accent didn't give that away. I'm American. Californian, though, kind of is a different differentiation. Also, I have a history of working with professional and age group athletes, mostly in endurance sports. My background is swimming and water polo, and then obviously triathlon for years and years. I like to do my nutrition coaching based on science. I have a science background, so I'm really particular, and I like working specifically with female athletes and endurance, and kind of covering LES, REDS, which is low energy availability specifically, and making sure that both men and women are fueling properly for the work that you're doing.
Perfect. So what we're going to go through today is we're going to break it into 3 phases. We're going to talk a little bit about postseason and what you could be thinking about from a health perspective. Phase 2, talking about body composition and what that could mean to you in this postseason period. Then phase 3 is really talking about healthy habits, and Fuelin could help you with that. And we'll try and allow at least 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A afterwards. So phase 1. So I think the way we want to frame this is that the postseason period is actually a really good period of time for everyone to start to think about, well, how did last season go, and what can I start to look at to improve or get an understanding of where my health and performance is leading into next season. So one of those ways is by recommending getting a blood test. Now, obviously, I've got a screenshot here of something taken from Inside Tracker. We do like Inside Tracker mainly because of the visibility of the trends over time. So Inside Tracker for us is just a system that allows you to visually see what is happening. Not all the zones are necessarily what we necessarily believe in, but it is a way of giving you visibility over what is happening within you. And so that, I think, is very important in that sense. The other thing I would say about Inside Tracker, if you do have a doctor who will do your routine bloods, then Inside Tracker, you can just use the upload service and upload existing and new results into the PDF upload server. And that costs around about $100 a year, which I think is money well spent. I think in terms of your blood testing is not going to tell you about your nutrition, okay, specifically. So we know that a blood type diet is BS, and it's not going to have any implications on your health. But what getting a blood test could do, especially in relation to some of these markers that are put here, is give you an indication of where you sit from a health and potentially a performance perspective as an endurance athlete. So I think, as it says here, you can't fix what you don't know. We always talk about test, don't guess. It can prevent you spending unnecessary money and taking unnecessary supplements, which I think is a very important point. Too often, especially with professional athletes in particular, we'll see that they tend to have suitcases upon suitcases of supplements that do absolutely nothing. And I can tell you now, age group athletes are no different. It will set a benchmark, okay, for you, and that relates to deficiencies. We see historically there is, and through the literature, that there will be upwards of somewhere between 25 and 40% of endurance athletes with low ferritin or low iron stores, and that will certainly impact or negatively impact your performance if you're trying to train at your absolute best. There are other markers that you consider from a health and performance perspective. Some of those are outlined again in the far right panel there. Active B12, not B12, but active B12 is really the only form of B12 that you should be getting measured, because it will give you an accurate measurement of B12 status. Your vitamin D3 status, you're about to go, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you're about to go into winter. From October onwards, the sunlight, the wavelength of the sunlight will not produce vitamin D. If you're already insufficient or deficient going into winter, I can guarantee you it's only going to get worse unless you know what your levels are and the appropriate supplementation associated with that. Some other tests that aren't necessarily on Inside Tracker are things like the omega index and the omega 6-3 ratio. Super interesting. Elizabeth's just written an article about involving fish and omega 3s in your daily diet over the holiday period. What this will give you a good measure or a good understanding of is your systemic inflammation in the body. So how an omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, versus omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory, could make a difference to how you feel, how you recover, but also in relation to health, brain health, and heart health. So there are a number of tests there that, we're happy to share. It's not, there's nothing unique about these tests. It's what you do with those tests afterwards. On our program, if you are in the co-pilot or one-to-one program, you get an analysis based on what your blood tests look like, and a written feedback about what you could do with that. So that is important to understand. For those who are on the autopilot, they could certainly pay for a consultation to get a better understanding of what those blood tests mean.
And Scott, why do we encourage people to look at those trends over time? Why is that important, as opposed to just, oh my gosh, my vitamin D is crazy low this month?
Yeah, and I think it is really good. Look, a snapshot of a blood test can be misleading. So certainly vitamin D, it's not going to necessarily change dramatically over time, maybe unless you took, say, a 50,000 bolus the day before. But things like your blood sugars, certainly if there was something picked up on blood sugars, it could have been affected by exercising in the morning. It could have been affected by you not being fasted. Things like your liver enzymes will be affected by exercise within 36 to 48 hours beforehand. And so those measures, if they are abnormal, you may want to get those checked again to make sure it is reliable, and then looking at trends over time, because most of these things will take a certain period of time before they start to normalize. Things like your HbA1c is a relationship between sugar and hemoglobin, and that's over a 90-day period. And that's probably going to be a better marker for your insulin sensitivity and any insensitivity there in relation to glucose. So something like that would be something to track over time, and that will be much better for you. I think this is still me. In terms of the way you want to be thinking, again, from a body composition standpoint, something like a Dexa scan would be incredibly useful for you to get an understanding of, do you actually need to focus on body composition as a priority? So the reason we would recommend a Dexa scan is because it's going to be far more reliable than bioelectrical impedance. Depending on the user, skin fold calipers can be extremely useful, but again, as long as it is, say, a 7-point ISAC measurement and not sort of a 3 grab in the gym and telling you that you're, 12% body fat and you're in fact actually 20%. So the DEXA scan will also give you a measure of bone mineral density. And I can tell you now that don't consider yourself, because you are young, that you will not have an issue with bone density. We've seen this time and time again that individuals between 30 and 50 years of age can still have low bone mineral density in the hip and in the spine, depending on previous history of fueling. So whether you've had some disordered eating or eating disorders, whether you've got a history of underfueling over time, and whether there hasn't been enough impact and weight-bearing exercise, i.e. lifting weights and doing a lot of swimming and biking, which ultimately is a non-weight-bearing form of exercise. So bone mineral density from a health perspective, super important to get an understanding of. Your fat mass and fat-free mass is certainly going to be super important in terms of determining whether a focus on reducing body weight and body mass and body fat is actually required. I would also say that if you are considering getting a DEXA scan in the off season, sometimes it's really good to also get a fitness test done to actually see where your fitness is in relation to where your current body composition is. Because then if you make improvements in your body composition, then you should also get that fitness test done again. And that would show you that by losing potential or improving your body composition, did you actually make a significant improvement in performance? Because there will be a tipping point where reductions in body composition gets too far and actually negatively impacts body composition, where Elizabeth talked about low energy availability, red S, and we've done a number of talks on that, which all relates to underfueling and that focus of going too far the opposite direction. And there's just a quick sort of view in terms of DEXA scan. Underwater weighing is sort of the top stand. Bod pod, you sort of jump in, it gives you a displacement measure. Skin folds and bioelectrical impedance is probably going to be dependent on the user and brand, and then eyeballing. Some people, will swear that they could guess a percentage of body fat down to the 0.0%, but ultimately eyeballing is a pretty ineffective way and non-reliable way of judging body composition. Okay.
Yeah. And just touching on the DEXA scan, a lot of times we get questions. The level of radiation is minimal, so you don't have to worry about that. The test takes anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes, super easy, non-invasive. The recommendations currently are once every 2 years. However, if you have a history of disordered eating, if you know that your bone density is low, it came back, or you're on certain medications, you want to test more regularly. So the blood work and the DEXA, you're looking at least once a year, preferably more for the blood work. It's something to continually be monitoring, and it's not just for performance, it really is for longevity. So one of the measurements that Scott had there was the visceral adipose tissue. That's a prime marker for longevity, to predict metabolic sensitivity, to predict cardiovascular disease. This time in the off season really is when we want you guys to be looking at your long-term health. It will make you a better athlete, but it will also help you further on down the road. And doing these tests now is what's going to help with that. All right, so improving body composition. Let's say you've done your DEXA scan and you realize body composition needs some improvement, and that is entirely up to you. We're not talking about fat versus skinny. This is as in terms of health. If you've decided that you need improvements in body composition, this is what we're looking at and what we're recommending. So the key kind of markers around this, if you managing your fat intake, that is going to help with improving body composition. Fat, very calorically dense, very easy to overdo. A little extra avocado, a little extra oil here and there, 1 or 2 handfuls of nuts or seeds very quickly turns into 6 or 7. So being able to manage that, and also making sure that the fats that you are consuming are healthy fats, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats in those nuts, seeds, and avocados. Now is the time in this off season when your training is adjusted a bit to be smart about the carbohydrates. At no point in time are we saying that you don't need carbohydrates, but you can be a bit more flexible with how much you're consuming and when you're consuming them. So carbohydrates around training sessions is still very valuable, but there might be opportunities in this off season for you to play around with fasting, for you to do sessions without in-session fueling. Again, that's between you and your coach and what that looks like in terms of if it's a low zone 1, zone 2, longer endurance ride. So really kind of periodizing your nutrition, but also periodizing your carbohydrates during this time can help with body composition. Leaning into strength, I cannot reinforce this enough. It is not only important for bone mineral density, like we were talking before, for your hormonal panel that Scott was mentioning in the blood work, testosterone, especially for men, doing that strength training is also going to help with body composition. If you want to change the way that your body looks, add some muscle in there. And it's fun. I swear, triathletes, strength training is fun.
Just on those 2 points as well, for those of you, we posted a number of sort of reviews on strength training on our Instagram account and also on our website, some articles written by some strength and conditioning athletes relating to that. So certainly some information about carbohydrates and whether or not you need it before or during weight sessions. There was an interesting post that we just put up, which again, and you'll see some nice videos of Elizabeth lifting weights as well. So it's definitely worth reading.
Which for the reason that we all laugh so much is because 2 years ago, Elizabeth was not in the gym, 2.5 now, couldn't lift, didn't know anything about it. And now I'm addicted. So it's, and I run faster, bike better. I'm not injured. Bone density improved, do it. All right, maintaining movement throughout the off season, it's important. I realize training is adjusted a bit, but to make changes in body composition, it requires movement. Tracking your food, this is the perfect time to sit down and actually look at what it is you're eating. Kind of like Scott said, you know, people aren't reliable necessarily about guessing body fat percentage. A lot of people aren't accurate with what they're consuming. And that's either because they haven't stopped to look at portion sizes, they don't read labels, or they're mindlessly putting things into their diet. So tracking your food will not only help you realize what you're consuming, but potentially what you might be missing. And if you're going to make improvements in body composition, you really have to dial in that your daily caloric consumption, looking at your macronutrients. And then in terms of those macronutrients, they're all important, but specifically with body composition, protein is the most important. Chronically, we don't eat enough protein to begin with. And certainly if you're going to be building muscle and potentially cutting back on carbohydrates and fats, you will have to increase that protein consumption. To the right, you'll see we put some guidelines there. So protein, approximately your body weight in pounds. Fat is about half of your body weight in pounds, and carbs, that varies depending on activity. At Fuelin, we use the traffic light system. 30 grams or less is lower, 50 is moderate, and 100 is high. So at different times during the day, potentially lower, moderate, or high, balancing that out with your training.
And just to clarify about the carbohydrates, that's in relation to per meal, not over the course of the day. We would not be prescribing 30 grams of carbs in a day, no matter even if you're in a body composition or whatever you're doing, because that would probably go down the ketogenic route, which again, if you want to choose ketogenic, fine. But from our standpoint, it's going to be very tough to maintain for longevity, but also as an endurance athlete, it's probably not going to have the beneficial effects of you actually going really, really quickly. So that's our stand on it. And I apologize if someone is very much in favor of ketogenic diets, but from our standpoint, from the research, it does not support going very, very fast. And for most athletes, that's what it's about, going very, very fast. So that's all I'll say about that. I thought this is actually, Elizabeth, sorry, still on you.
No, I agree with you. This is an excellent quote. The most common mistake made by athletes seeking to lose fat is trying to prioritize this goal at the same time as training for one or more events. The reason that we bring up body composition right now is because your focus isn't on a race, potentially. your focus can be right now on actually making the changes, improving your blood work, building strength, getting the Dexa scan, improving bone density. Let that be the primary focus and train for that just as hard as you train for your races.
Yep. I was just saying a spelling mistake. Apologies. I'm obviously dyslexic. Fueling for postseason program. So again, as Elizabeth said, training purpose, like think about your purpose in training. And in this, what we're talking about specifically is improving body composition if it's required. And as we've spoken to Layla and the team at 80/20, that can be programmed specifically for what you're trying to achieve. So it's prioritization of that specific cycle. Generally speaking, somewhere between 6 and 12 week blocks. I know 80/20 splits it into 6-week training blocks. So it works out really perfectly. And depending on when you hit that goal and when you want to start doing your actual training, then you just work towards that. There will be a change in macro splits. I know we just gave you a very high overview of sort of your macro splits, but protein can probably go up to above sort of your weight in pounds, so up to sort of 2.5, even some individuals around 3 grams per kilo body weight. Fat can probably drop down a little bit, so below that sort of half your body weight. And then carbohydrates, as Elizabeth alluded to, are probably going to be on the lower side. Certainly Monday to Friday when training volume is not going to be as high, even though volume intensity will probably be quite high. Then on the weekends, it will go back to normal. And as we said, it's lower volume, higher intensity. I'm actually doing what's it called? The race week body weight program, yeah. Layla, that one that you've
done. Right. So racing weight is
racing weight. I've been doing
is our body
program.
So it's basically exactly what you said. It's sort of that low volume mixture of strength training and high intensity, and a really good chance to work on body comp.
Yeah, so I've been doing that, and it's a very different training stimulus for me because I don't usually do a lot of, I still think it's a lot of bike riding and swimming and running, but I don't usually do that. So it's a very big change in stimulus for me, but it's obviously having a pretty profound effect on what's happening with my weight and my body comp. So it's very interesting to go through, but that's the whole point of this, is mixing up the stimulus to bring about a different change. In our program, the way we can structure it is you can also, and I'll show this later in terms of time restricted feeding, if you want to implement that as a tool in your toolbox to enable you to stick to the total caloric intake, then time restricted feeding is one example of that. And I thought, again, like I've taken a few quotes from Matt from things that he's written in the past, but the most effective ways to train and eat for endurance fitness are different from the most effective ways to train and eat for fat loss. And we could not agree more. There is a big difference in the way we will prescribe fuel when you are in season versus out of season, because I can tell you now, and everyone's going on about the Norwegian hype train. It's like, guys, they're just eating. They're just eating to fuel performance. That's exactly what we do. It's like, if you want to go fast, you need energy you need calories, because calories create energy. Energy creates power. Power creates speed. Like, it's a pretty simple when you dumb it down. If you don't eat enough, you won't go fast. So forget about trying to lose weight in the season. Do it before you get to season. Manage your body composition as well as you can. You still may improve body composition throughout the training throughout the season, but your focus won't necessarily be that, or it certainly shouldn't be a loss in body fat for the entirety of the season whilst you're also trying to perform at your best. And we cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, pick your moments when you're going to do that. And if that means in season you're focusing on body comp, don't expect your performance to be at its best. And that's all the Norwegians are doing. They're prioritizing performance over body comp because they're elite athletes. They're already in really good shape. And again, think about that. Think about the context of what you're trying to achieve here. Remembering that they are super, super elite athletes with a VO2 of 90 plus. Like, it's a very different animal. So I'm all for the Norwegian hype train and the way in which they're promoting eating for performance. And I think it's great. Think about that when you are thinking about what you're trying to achieve. So this is the 80/20 race training plan. I think it's really great that the way they've got it set up. Level 1, 0-1 racing weight plans, 3 times strength workouts. Oh, sorry, that should be 2 strength workouts a week. Level 2 and level 3 is 3 strength workouts a week. I've been doing the level 2, level 3, as I said. I'm used to lifting weights, so that's not a problem. It's probably more the cycling and swimming for me. For the rest of you, it will probably be complete walk in the park, and you'll probably be loving it. So I think it's really nice. It sets out exactly like sets and reps. So for those of you that aren't familiar with lifting weights, then something like a 5-5 is written. That just means 5 sets of 5 reps. There's a really nice description about rep sub max. So that means if you can do 10 chin-ups and they're saying 2 reps sub max, then you would be doing 8 repetitions in that set. So you work out that 65% of 1 RM. A 1 repetition max is a strength test that probably a lot of you won't ever do. And to be honest, in professional sport, we don't often do a 1 rep max test. We do a 3 rep max because it's safer. A lot of that can be calculated from an estimation. And I think in the 80/20 website, there is an estimation calculator that you could put in based around what you could lift for, say, 8 reps or 10 reps and do that. Percentage of body weight, if that's written, super easy. If it says 65% of your body weight, just that's what you're lifting. And timed or time under tension, super effective way of lifting, especially when you're a novice. If it's 45 seconds timed, 45 seconds time under tension is a really great way of lifting and doing squats and things like that you absolutely hate, because if you've got the stopwatch on you, it forces you to continue lifting with time under tension. So I think that's really great. And then supersets is a simple description of back-to-back exercises without any rest period. And there's a lot more information on the 80/20 website around that. But I think the main point being is that the program exists and the nutrition can blend into whatever that training program is that is being done. And again, another final quote from Matt is, the ideal time to complete a racing weight training plan is right before you start a race focused training plan. So again, it just ties in with the off season and that period of time where you're focusing on something slightly different from your race. And that's exactly how we go about it as well. Right, Elizabeth.
All right, so who should be looking at the body composition program? We're going to go through who should and who shouldn't. So I'm going to run down some of these markers. And again, it's an open discussion. If you want to talk with one of us about if the program is right for you, absolutely recommend that before jumping in. If you have the Dexa validated, if your body fat percentage for men is greater than 12%, females greater than 20%, again, these are not hard numbers. Scott and I had worked on these. Talk to us if you're closer around these. If your fat mass index for males is greater than 6, females greater than 8. If your visceral adipose tissue is greater than 80, and if your bone mass density greater than -1. Again, on that DEXA scan, -1 or above is ideal, normal. -1 to -2.5 is osteopenia, low bone density. So we want to make sure, because there could be some effects on bone density, we want to make sure that your bone density is right. In terms of bloods, looking at your total cholesterol to HDL, that's better. That ratio is better than 3.4. If your LDL is greater than 100, definitely a good idea to be looking at something. If your A1C is greater than 5.7, this is that pre-diabetic, that type 2 diabetes kind of bottom line risk marker. So definitely something that you want to look into and kind of managing with your health. On the training component, and this is important, and this is why we talk about this on during this time of the year. Monday through Friday, if you are at or below about 10 hours, not counting a Saturday or Sunday long ride, long slow trail run. So Monday to Friday, at or about or below 10 hours, 2 to 3 strength training sessions a week, 2 to 4 cardio, low zone 1, zone 2, and 1 to 3 potentially on the lower side of less than 30 minutes of that high intensity interval training. And that's just because we want to make sure that you're fueled properly and have the energy to do these sessions correctly. Who it's not for, pretty much the opposites, but I think this is where you really want to be paying attention. if you were kind of on the fence or not wondering, a low body fat percentage. So you already, it's a body composition program, males less than 12, females less than 18%. That fat mass index, again, males less than 6, females less than 8. So just the opposites. The visceral fat less than 80. And this is kind of the wellness component that I want to make sure to touch on. If you have a history of disordered eating, if dieting and if really focusing in on this element of cutting calories and or changing the way that you're eating is going to trigger old disordered eating habits, or even send you to a place maybe where you haven't been, but this might encourage that, definitely not the program for you. Any kind of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, things like that, those could potentially get in the way. Physical issues, heart conditions, on any specific medications you want to check with us. And obviously, if you're a pregnant athlete, not the time to be working on body composition. Training, again, if you are training more than
on that, I think it's as much probably before you would go on any program with a nutrition program or training program, it's important to just have a consultation with the expert. Okay. Like you would book a consultation with someone like Elizabeth, who has expertise in disordered eating and eating disorders and working with athletes with that, to work out what the appropriate program is. We wouldn't be comfortable with an athlete just jumping straight in. So it's not to necessarily exclude you. And I know it says this program is not for, but it would be a discussion around what is the appropriate program for you. And it may not be, therefore, it might be dissuading you from actually needing to lose body weight and actually putting you on a program for health. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from it.
Perfect. Thank you. And yeah, training is an opposite.
Yeah. Okay. So in relation to that, the way in which we've set up this program is that it's very much based around 3 pillars, which is that it's simple, it's personalized, and results driven. So as Elizabeth hinted at, we do have, we use a simple traffic light system where red is lower carb, yellow is moderate, and green is higher. So the athlete starts to recognize when certain amounts of carbohydrate are required for certain training sessions, which would be delivered by your coach. There are multiple different ways of tracking within the app. So you can use things like MyFitnessPal or Lose It to track. You can track within the app using the meals and the ingredients that are provided, or using a simple hand sizing method, which is also within the app. So there are differing ways depending on your psychology and the way you prefer to track within the app. In terms of it being personalized, the most important thing is that it syncs directly with Training Peaks. So whatever the 80/20 team is actually delivering to you, we will be able to sync with that and be able to provide you with the necessary fuel for the purpose that you're working towards. And then in terms of the results, we do focus a lot on some data metrics, which I know most triathletes and endurance athletes love. So things like sweat testing, or sweat rate testing, I should say. So understanding how much you sweat on a rate basis per hour, how much fluid you're taking in on an hourly basis, milligrams of sodium per hour, milligrams per liter, and then the appropriate amounts of fluid to maintain a percentage of body weight loss in the varying conditions, i.e. if it's very hot or if it's a cooler environment, which is ultimately going to impact your race plan and give you a very solid understanding of what your hydration requirements are going to be for the race. And we do the same thing for carbohydrates. So understanding the amount of carbohydrates that we can talk about this when I show you some screens. I'll show you that in a minute. So the other big point, and what we've talked about consistently on this talk, is fueling for a purpose. And I think the big thing is asking yourself, like, what is your primary purpose? What is your training focus? What's your target weight? Are you happy to use time-restricted feeding in the post-season period? How aggressive you want to be in terms of that weight loss? And then can you perform potentially a fasted session in the morning? The way we've now configured this within the app, and that's a real screenshot from the app, is just at the touch of a button, you can update what your purpose is. So If you're out of season at the moment, it might be body composition. As it says, training focus, you would be in the post-season gym/period, time restricted feeding, yes or no, what your goal is. And then in terms of can you train while fasted, that may be applied if you're not doing time restricted feeding before a session in the morning, which was of probably less than 60 minutes. Anything over that, we're not going to recommend fasted training. And certainly what we're going to be recommending is fueling after a session that extends beyond that 60 to 70 minute mark. But what we're doing with that is making it very easy for the user or the athlete to change their focus and potentially do it in a couple of sort of 2-week blocks. So even if you are in season, for instance, you could update your primary purpose from performance to body composition in discussion with your coach to actually manage your nutrition appropriately. And this is, I think, a really nice way of, just fluctuating what you're doing throughout the year, and not constantly trying to be in a weight loss or a fat loss period, but actually providing yourself with enough fuel to fuel that performance when it's required. The way it works, as I said, it syncs with the Training Peaks. You just provide access and then we pretty much do the rest. The way the 80-20 plan will be written out is these are the intensity mapping. So the only thing 80-20 has that is a little bit different to us, but it doesn't actually necessarily impact us at all, is that if you were writing your zones into the title of the program, and you can see that's a screenshot from my Training Peaks, is that next to the title, you can see in brackets, there's a 2 or there's a 3 that relates to the intensity mapping. So as long as that number is included in the title, and we're working with 80-20 to have that within these set training programs, then it is there. It's the only thing that we need athletes to check, that there is an intensity mapping in the title of the session to enable us to know what type of fuel you require during that session, before and after. So once it's all synced, as I said, you can track with within Fuelin, or you can use external food tracking systems like Lose It or MyFitnessPal. We have the sweat and carb testing, which I can show you some screenshots of. And then probably the thing that most athletes find probably most beneficial, along with the actual nutrition program, is that we hold a 1 hour weekly Q&A session based on whatever athletes are wanting to learn about. This week, for instance, is an Ask Me Anything 1 hour session whereby questions are submitted by athletes, and then we go through and answer those. Okay, so this is an example of what would happen within the app. So as you can see, there are the colors and there's the sessions put through. So in this, this is from a professional athlete program, which was a little bit higher volume. So you can see in the morning, they've got a swim and it's dictated as a Z3 session or an intensity mapping of Z3. They're being recommended a yellow snack beforehand. Now, if you pressed on that yellow snack, it would bring up a number of options to choose from. In this case, the athlete has chosen white toast with almond butter jelly. It's got those amounts of macronutrients and calories that would be consumed before the session. As you can see, in a swim, nothing's being prescribed to consume. After that session, they're being told to replenish as much glycogen as possible, even though it's going to take longer than, say, the 30 minutes that's occurring there, but they're certainly refueling to top up blood sugars and allow them to then go into what is potentially a fairly long brick. So they're being told to eat, and we've updated the actual recommendations on this further. So you will be given a target amount of grams per hour of carbohydrates, some practical ways in which you do that, and then also the total calories that you would be expected to consume in that session. This is a brick session, so on the right-hand screen, you can see as well that they're being told to have 1 gel every 15 to 20 minutes. After that, they're then being told to have a green snack. In this case, the athlete has chosen Greek yogurt topped with mango and banana and some other fruit, and that's supplying that amount of macronutrients and total calories. And then again, they're eating a high carbohydrate meal in the evening. In this case, the option that was chosen was chicken with sweet corn. Now, they're in-app choices. The athlete also has the choice of just saying, right, I need 100 grams of carbs based on what I'm getting told, or I need at least 100 grams of carbs. I'm going to make that at home. I'm going to track that with MyFitnessPal or lose it. And that is another viable option for an athlete. In terms of carbohydrate capacity testing, this is what we're talking about. So working from the screen from left to right, at the top, what it's designating is it a temperature of less than 85 Fahrenheit or less than 30 degrees Celsius, or is it greater than? So that's really important because we know as temperature rises, there will be a slowing of gastric emptying, and that can negatively impact the ability of the athlete to take in large amounts of carbohydrates. The zone at which you're working, are you working at zone 2 or lower, or zone 3 above? Generally speaking, what we're thinking is zone 3 or above, or intensity mapping of 3 or above is going to be a zone, at least at race pace, and certainly one at which you're going to be using predominantly carbohydrates as a fuel source, as partitioned by the body due to the VO2 percentage of VO2 max. We then have, we'll clearly outline what your average total is for carbohydrates, including fluids and solids, and then work down into your grams per kilo body weight, what that looks like in relation to grams per hour and your grams per kilo body weight, and then break it down into what you're taking in terms of solids and fluids, because the type of carbohydrate you take in could also severely impact how you feel in terms of any GI discomfort, which if you move to the panel on the far right and the arrow down the bottom, what we're also tracking is how much GI discomfort you get. And then can we work about improving that either through repetitive high carbohydrate fueling or changing up the type of fuel that you would be choosing. The middle screen shows you just a synopsis or an overview of what type of what the session was. So in this case, it was a bike session, two and a bit hours, what the athlete took on. So over the total session, they took in just over 220 grams of carbs, which equated to around 83 grams of carbs per hour. And they had slight GI discomfort, but nothing to be too worried about. So again, a bit like blood testing, what we're doing over time is tracking your trends in the ability to consume high amounts of carbohydrates. We know that based on empirical evidence, but also field-based evidence, that those athletes that improve their carbohydrate tolerance tend to do better in races, and they tend to also reduce their GI discomfort through repetitive gut training. Okay. I've actually finished on time. It's amazing. Right.
Perfect time.
Does anyone?
I know. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Chime in.
Now, obviously, we've gone through a lot of information there. What I would say is don't be shy of asking questions. It often takes one person to ask a question and then people start doing it. Feel free, if you don't want to ask it out loud, just write it into the chat feature. Layla, you might have some questions to at least kickstart the talk, because I know it usually just takes one person to do it, and then we can go from there.
Let's see if anyone else. I did have one actually, sort of to roll back a little bit with those blood tests. We have a relationship with Inside Tracker, so our athletes are familiar with Inside Tracker. I know they have a couple of different types of tests. So you have one that really captures everything. So the essential is, I think, like 48 biomarkers now or something. It's a high amount. But there's a couple of other ones, like an essential. I think there's a Charlene Flanagan, there's a essentials, and there's the ultimate. Is there one that really works if people were going to invest in the Inside Tracker? Is there one that works better if they also wanted to, provide that blood work data to you guys?
Yeah, I look, my personal preference is they get that panel that we just put up, and happy to share that, and they just go to their doctor, get the blood taken, and then just upload. It saves them a heap of money, whether they use your code or whether they use our code. I don't really care. It should cost them about $100 a year as opposed to the $800 a year. So I think if they can get their insurance to cover it that way and get their doctor to do it, if they're based in England, obviously NHS, hopefully they'll get it done for free. Australia, hopefully for free. But if they've got to get it in America, I would, toss up. Sometimes the Inside Tracker is actually cheaper in America than actually going through your doctor as well if you don't have insurance. So it's just a cost thing, but certainly
Yeah.
uploading the results is something that we would tend to favor. I think the Ultimate pretty much covers most of the markers we've got there, which I think is about $700. Which
Yeah, I think it's fine. So in the US here, it's 589. They're usually running.
okay. And I know they just did something for 200. I'm not sure what they did in terms of Black Friday sales and things like
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
Again, we're happy to share that blood testing, the markers that we recommend, because look, end of the day, it's just a blood test. It's what you do with the results of that blood test that matter. So that's what I would say.
What would they then, do you guys have a list or something that they could provide to the doctor? Because I know I've seen some athletes here go and just ask their doctor for a blood panel, and then it's like there's nothing super helpful. Like it's missing a lot of key things. So do you guys provide like a list of like what you should be asking your doctor to sort of include in the panel?
Yeah, so when the athlete signs up, they get given a lot of information, which again, just as an FYI, don't be too overwhelmed with the amount of information we send. We send it as a couple of emails, PDF, and then there's obviously a lot of information within the app. We try to be as comprehensive as possible. Unfortunately, in today's age, most people don't read everything. So they want things to be very, very sort of short, but it is actually a complex topic. Nutrition with training, and actually sometimes we've got to sort of delve into it and read some real information. So if you can just take your time to read through all the information and digest it, it certainly makes it a lot easier. But we provide that list of markers to do.
So someone could technically, they'd almost be better to wait, sign up, and then get, really get in and go and get the blood test.
Yeah, if they were really against signing up for the program, we're happy to share the blood testing markers that we'd recommend. It's, as I said, it's not going to be anything that's going to change our lives, but it may change the athlete's life in that sense, and that would make us feel pretty good. So
exactly. All right, I'm going to go through a couple of these questions. I'll take this first one. Michelle says, I'm a vegetarian. How does your app deal with different diets? My son's keto, my daughter's vegan. Good Lord. You're making a lot of meals probably. The app is great. So you will put filters in for your dietary requirements, and then you will be able to see only those recipes that you've selected. So for vegetarian, you would click that. And even some, will ask to include eggs or honey, so there are specifics, and you can dial those in and be able to see the recipes that way.
I would imagine who wrote that? Michelle. I'd imagine for Michelle, you'd probably choose vegetarian as the option.
Yes.
Or you'd probably choose vegan, vegetarian, and then mix and match based on what you could produce the most of, and then go from there. But yeah, it's tough when you're trying to create 3 different meal types or dietary preferences. It's hard enough for a lot of people to stick to one. Let alone 3. So it could be again something where you sort of sit down and talk to Elizabeth, because she's got a special interest in. It's not that I don't like plant-based diets, I just don't have that expertise in that, and Elizabeth does. It could be something where she could help you out with that.
Definitely. And a lot of the recipes that I've specifically put in are very easy. They, to substitute the chicken or whatever for tofu, seitan, any of those, and we can kind of walk through that as well. All right, Amy's question.
What did Amy say?
Often I will go into a zone 2 run and intend to do that, but I will run into zone 3. Does the app understand that?
I guess, well, no, we can't predict what you're going to do. If you're getting told to stay in zone 2, stay in zone 2. Pretty much, like, you've got to be looking, even if you're in that, the luteal phase, you've got to look at your heart rate. You've got to look at what your wattage is doing and adjust that appropriately to what the training is. I think, again, if you're talking about nutrition for specific phases of menstrual cycle, the evidence isn't there to support that you are going to perform better with higher fat in the second phase versus higher carbohydrate in the front phase. there is going to be individual differences, but if you look at the majority of the data, it's not compelling enough for us to say, right, you need higher fat in that. And I think we were talking about this with Layla another time, was it's sort of like, you know, does the nutrition dictate what the menstrual cycle is doing, or does the menstrual cycle dictate what the training's doing? And that then comes down to you needing a coach, probably on a one-to-one basis, where you talk to the coach about programming in specifically to your menstrual cycle if you want that. Now, again, I'm not saying it's the right way or the wrong way, but that requires a lot of input from the coach and the athlete. And I don't think that can be automated very easily. So that's probably where I sit on that at this point. But certainly, I think you listen to your body, and, you know, if you're just going too high, you're going too high. We would be planning, if it was Z2, we'd be planning higher fat, lower carb in and around that meal, and then certainly refueling you afterwards with appropriate amounts of carbohydrates, which would be spread across the entire day to give you your total amount of carbohydrates, and that would be in relation to your total training volume, and that would be relative to what happened last week and what your goal is in terms of, are you trying to lose weight or are you actually trying to perform at your best? As we didn't have a slide on this one, I don't think, which shows, but there's about 70 plus calculations that go into determining whether it's a red, a yellow, or a green across each day. Again, we try and keep it very simple by just presenting some colors and total macros and calories, but there is a lot of back-end calculations that go into working out what you actually require at that point in time.
All right, next couple I can answer pretty quick.
Does that help you, Amy? Sorry, Amy, does that, speak up? I can't see you. Does that sort of answer your question? Hopefully.
Yes.
Where's Amy? Oh yeah, cool.
All right. Yes, Inside Tracker is available in Canada. Harold asked if September blood test is sufficient. I would say that depends on a couple of factors. Have you raced since September? Potentially, were you in a hard training block and there might be some deficiencies based on really hard training? Your body might not be recovered. And or have you changed your diet significantly since then? Have you tested before and know that you're low in certain things? If the answer is kind of generally no for all of those, then I would say a September test is probably pretty good. And then based off of that, then I would say look to get one in 3 to 4 months to see if things are improving, and or if the test you had in September highlighted anything big, that any big deficiencies that we might want to address, potentially doing another test would be a good idea. Do we have plans for people that don't feel—
and just on that, I think your last point is really poignant in that I think September would be fine, generally speaking, but if things were found in that point, like you were low on vitamin D, for instance, and you've been dosing on vitamin D, then get it done like 8 to 12 weeks later, which would be sort of around now, I guess, to see whether your vitamin D levels have now come up to a normal state, or at least sufficient or optimal, so around 70 milligrams per deciliter for an athlete, which again, if you look at the Inside Tracker levels, they're very low for vitamin D. I don't think they're appropriate for an athlete. Same with ferritin. I think it could be a little bit higher for an endurance athlete. So you need to look at some of those markers and actually know specifically what applies to an athlete versus a lay person. And that is very important to understand. So, yeah.
And to Scott's point, what is also, and why we spoke earlier about looking at not just a snapshot in time, but looking over time. I know how I feel when my vitamin D is at a certain level and when it's low. So just because Inside Tracker, anybody says this is optimal, I've looked at my vitamin D levels over time and I can go and say, you know what, it says it was optimal, but I still didn't feel well. It had to get to a certain point before I personally felt well. So that's another reason to do tests and also personally track your data so you know what's right for you. Do we have, John asked, do we have plans for people that don't feel like they need to lose weight, but perhaps want to increase muscle mass? Yes, absolutely. Combined with strength and diet, we do plans for maintaining, building muscle, body composition. So yes, we have you covered for that.
John, on that question, I think nutrition plays a very important part, but the stimulus is going to play a bigger part. If you really want to increase muscle mass, you've got to get in the gym, and you're probably talking about significantly changing your training stimulus. So it is going to be very much dictated by heavy lifting, a lot of volume in terms of a lot more volume in terms of reps. So probably between 8 and 15 reps, multiple sets, 4 to 5 sets, shorter rest periods, maybe 45 seconds up to 2 minutes, but fairly fatiguing, not going to help your endurance training at that point in time. Calorie intake is going to be significantly increased to allow you to gain weight as well. But it is very much based on the nutrition will support you, but it's the stimulus of exercise, that the modality you choose, that's going to have the biggest impact on that. Do not think that eating more protein is suddenly going to give you bigger muscles if you're not lifting or providing the appropriate stimulus to that. Okay. So that's where, oh, you're going.
I was just going to say, lifting for triathletes is very different than lifting for bulk and performance and adding significant amount of muscle. So again, even if you're on a strength program, it looks different if you're really trying to put on muscle mass. All right. Does the app provide a shopping list to plan out your week? No, we don't, because we don't know what's in your individual kitchen or what meals you're going to be consuming, what your family, you know, if you're feeding a vegan and a vegetarian and a keto athlete, we don't know what's going on there. However, it's very easy to make a shopping list. What I do with mine is once my recommendations, I have those in for the week and I see what I'm going to be eating, I'll go through and select recipes, pre-select them, put them into the app and then I can look and make my shopping list from that. So again, we've covered this on one of our athlete webinars. That's how I do it. And I think other athletes, you know, have their standards that they have every week. I know Scott has a system. I think it's about figuring out what works best for you.
And I think on that, we can supply a generic shopping list that more often than not helps a lot of athletes just get started and get their pantry in the right place. So I think that is possible. Certainly something we've looked at is when athletes use the in-app tracking system and pick meals appropriately, that we can generate a shopping list. It just hasn't been created at this point in time. So yeah, it will get there eventually, but at this point in time, we don't actually get too many complaints about that. I saw Jonathan has supplied the list of blood tests that we recommend. There are a couple of things on there as well that Inside Tracker won't track, and that's just to be mindful of. They don't do any record of thyroid markers. So I think, Jay, that's not the most updated list, but T3 would be something else that you would consider getting done if you've had a history of disordered eating disorders, very high training volume, any history of stress reactions, stress fractures or fractures. T3 is something, or any history of underfueling or suspicion of underfueling. T3, I think, is a very important hormone to get tested. Your omega index and omega 6-3 ratio won't be shown on Inside Tracker as well. In terms of testosterone, look, it's always one of those ones. There is a big diurnal pattern to testosterone. So free testosterone certainly could be tested in males if there is, reduction in morning erections and you're worried about total muscle mass and lethargy and a few other symptoms. But it may or may not be required, and some doctors will refuse to do that. Couple of the lipid tests there. So also having, I did see it, where is it? LP(a), and another one called ApoB. They're related to non-modifiable risk factors for heart disease. Those two tests in particular, LP(a) and ApoB, only have to be done once in your lifetime, and they will give you a very clear understanding of potential further investigation down the cardiology route, whether if you've got a family history, whether your mum or dad or mum's mum, mum's dad, or mum's siblings dad's siblings, if there's a history of heart disease and you have elevated numbers for the LPA or ApoB, then potentially you may want to get that checked out as a high performing athlete to reduce the risk of potentially a cardiovascular event occurring, which you may have no idea that you're at risk of. I think everything else there, as I said, the B12 should be active B12 in the form of what we call hollow TC. And certainly when you're getting iron checked, make sure they get a full iron panel. Serum iron will tell you nothing about your ferritin stores. So get at least your ferritin levels checked. The TIBC, the total iron binding capacity, and your transferrin saturation are very important for diagnosing iron deficiency and then iron deficiency anemia. And there are certain levels that you need to have in order to be told whether you are iron deficient or iron deficient anemic. And then supplementation with an iron, a ferrous iron would be recommended to get those levels up. And back to, I think Amy, was it Amy? No, not Amy. Michelle said she's a vegetarian. Her daughter's a vegan. Something very important to understand is that vegetarians and vegans will more often have an iron deficiency or a ferritin deficiency or insufficiency, just due to majority of heme iron is located in animal products. And so that's an important factor. Some other considerations around being a plant-based diet is that creatine is predominantly found in animal-based products. So if you are a vegetarian or a strict vegan, then something like creatine supplementation will certainly improve performance. And certainly creatine, we didn't touch on supplementation or anything like that in this talk, but creatine would be one of those supplements that we would recommend on a daily basis to endurance athletes as well, 5 grams a day. And that's just a really nice supplement to be constantly taking over time. And certainly if you're going into a body composition phase where you are going to be doing a lot more strength work, then certainly consuming creatine monohydrate would be advantageous. And again, I just did a post on this in the effects of creatine and the best form of creatine to take on our Instagram page, so you can have a read about that. Any other questions? Cool. Michelle, do you take creatine or not?
No, but my son thinks I should, so I think
You absolutely should.
right.
Yeah, I think, look at, and if you don't mind, could I ask roughly age-wise, how old are you?
So they're actually not at home anymore, but they're.
Oh, you? How old are you?
58.
Okay, so certainly what we've seen, again, from a brain perspective, creatine is now being linked to, neurodegenerative diseases and improvements in cognition and memory. So I think even from that health perspective, I would be taking creatine on a daily basis. If we look at sarcopenia, so the progressive loss of muscle as we age, creatine is going to help increase lean muscle mass, reduce body fat, improve power, improve strength. From an endurance standpoint, it improves hydration status. There is evidence to support its role in time to exhaustion and sprint performance. So for me, I can't see why anyone wouldn't take creatine. I think in terms of creatine, the only negative downside could be a slight increase in weight. But if you are taking a daily dose of 5 grams a day, that generally doesn't seem to be too much of an issue. In terms of dosage for men and women, there's probably not enough research to differentiate between men and women. So around 5 grams a day seems to be what works. I think if you're a very large male, there could be an argument to take slightly more creatine, maybe a 10-gram dose. But again, you're probably talking 100 plus kilos for those individuals. And yeah, I wouldn't take any less than 5 grams a day because there hasn't been any efficacy for a lower dose. So even if you're a very small human, I would still take 5 grams a day and you'll probably see very good effect. Any other questions? I know we're probably just on time. Any other questions?
I think Jonathan put the link in there too about extending the Black Friday special.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah, at the moment, we did a Black Friday till Monday. What day is it there? It's
Tuesday.
It's Tuesday where you are. And that was a 50% off that we did for Black Friday, but we will extend it for the 80/20 community as a thank you.
Yeah, and that should have gone out to everybody who subscribes to our 80/20 newsletter. But if you didn't get it, you can always reach out to us at results@8020.com and we'll send you that link. You know where to find us usually on the forums or the emails, or they always find us. So yeah, reach out if you're interested or got more questions, please reach out, but I can send you that link if needed.
Yeah, perfect.
And lastly, there's going to be a survey that comes up once the Zoom closes out. So we very much value all feedback. So please take 2 minutes to let us know, how we can improve.
Yeah, it'd be really great if everyone can just fill that in and just give us some feedback. But look, I hope it's been valuable to everyone. Hopefully you've got some nice little nuggets you can take away and use straight away from a practical sense. I think performance nutrition and nutrition in general is a complicated subject. And as we always say, if everyone was, if it was really easy, then everyone would be smashing it. And that's certainly not the case and what we're seeing. So we do our best. It's constantly improving. We get a lot of athlete feedback to help improve the system. And so, having your feedback continues that process. So thank you very much. And yeah, reach out to us. As we said at the back, if you've got any questions, you can email either at info@fuelin.com or coach@fuelin.com, or reach out via social media, Instagram or Facebook. And that's another way you can get in touch with us. Okay.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure people, we're just really touching the surface of this topic.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you guys giving us some time, and yeah, hoping that we can get more of our 80/20 athletes integrating an appropriate nutrition system into their training to get even better results.
Yeah, cool. I saw Robert Bob's on there, just tucked away in the
yes.
corner. He's got a race. He's got his race this weekend. So good luck, Bob. I'm sure you'll smash it. So cool. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. And
thank you so much.
Speak to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks, Layla.